A well-made sailing vessel can last for a very long time. It's not unheard of for some vessels to remain afloat for a whole century. All good things come to an end, though, and when the end comes for a ship, it's usually towed to a scrapyard so everything of value can be ripped away and recycled. Not every ship meets that end, though. Some of them become fascinating, forgotten, and abandoned objects, like the ones you're about to see. Let's start things off with the Oslam shipwreck of Batumi, Georgia. That's Georgia as in the European nation, not Georgia as in the US state. This is quite literally a shipwreck named Desire, as that's what the word Oslam translates into English as from its native Turkish. Batumi is the main coastal town in Georgia and serves as a Black Sea port. The Oslam was approaching this port when the Turkish-owned tanker ran ashore and then became stuck. Rescue attempts were made, but the Oslam remained firmly stuck and eventually half sank. The other half of the ship has been poking out above the waves ever since. Nobody's ever been able to pinpoint the reason that the Oslam ran aground, but it was probably down to human error. In the years since the wrecking, the Oslam has become an unlikely diving board for tourists and is especially popular with children. We're not sure how safe it is to climb up a shipwreck and dive off the top of it, but nobody seems to do anything to discourage it. The Oslam will stay here until somebody agrees to pay for it to be safely removed. That might take some time. The Macuti lighthouse in Beira, Mozambique, has been abandoned for more than 20 years. The rusty shipwreck in front of it is even older. You have to visit Macuti Beach when the tide is low if you want to get a proper look at it, as if you arrive too early, only a few of the bulkheads are visible above the waves. Come at the right time, though, and you could walk through the entire wreck if you wanted to. We'd never advise doing so because it looks dangerous, but there are plenty of explorers who've taken their chances and captured some great footage in the process. The lighthouse was erected in 1904 and continued operating until the beginning of the 21st century. The wreck is that of a tug, which was deliberately run aground in front of the lighthouse in 1985 to serve as a breakwater. Wrecking the vessel in this manner was considered controversial at the time, as it was once considered a national icon in Mozambique and even featured on one of the country's postage stamps. Now that the lighthouse has been abandoned, it's become a tourist attraction, thus explaining the many bars dotted around the vicinity. The wreck of the Edward Bolan in Namibia is noteworthy for several reasons, but the biggest of those reasons is the fact that it's a very long way from the coast. In fact, it's in the middle of the desert. You'd be entitled to wonder how it got there. And the answer is that the shorelines of the Skeleton Coast have changed a lot since the Bolan met with disaster. Nobody's quite sure what happened to the 300-foot-long vessel, other than it somehow managed to run aground in September 1909 and couldn't be refloated despite efforts being made for several days. The shoreline has since receded by more than 1,000 feet, leaving us with the impression that the wreck somehow dropped here out of the sky. It's not the only wreck here, as you can see by the broken pieces of timber and steel that surround it, but it survived the passing of the last century a lot better than its neighbors have. Tourists occasionally come along to take a closer look at the wreck, but that's a dangerous game to play. A family of jackals set up home in the Edward Bolan about 20 years ago, and they're very hostile to humans. Here's another shipwreck on a beach. It's the MV Irish Trader, which can be found on the beach of Baltray in Boyne Valley, Ireland. Records indicate that the vessel was piled high with fertilizer destined for Drogheda when it ran aground in 1974 for unknown reasons. The captain was eventually blamed for the incident, but there was a lack of evidence to suggest that he was particularly at fault. Salvage teams managed to retrieve all of the MV Irish Trader's cargo, but the ship itself couldn't be saved. Looking at the state of the wreck, it's hard to believe that it's only 50 years old. It could easily pass for something double that age. It's disintegrated to this extent because of the conditions in this part of Ireland. which lead to erosion for anything made of steel that hangs around for too long. The state of the wreck means that it's dangerous, but perhaps not as dangerous as the soft sand around it. There's nothing to stop people from approaching the wreck, but even if part of it doesn't fall on your head, there's a significant risk of getting trapped in quicksand. The Royston shipwrecks are a fascinating collection of old, decaying sea vessels in Courtenay, British Columbia, Canada. All 14 of the ships were brought to Comox Harbor and sunk deliberately to create a breakwater. The breakwater was necessary to make things easier for the local logging industry, which used the waterways for transport, but was often impeded by unpredictable tides. The first of the shipwrecks was brought here during the 1930s, but many more were added as the years passed. Experts tell us that there are 3 windjammers, 3 frigates, a pair of destroyers, a trio of steam tugs, 2 barks, and a harpoon boat in the sunken fleet. The mills that the ships protected closed down long ago, but the breakwater is still standing. They'll never be removed because they enjoy protected status, having been granted it under the British Columbia Heritage Conservation Act. The local government considers the wrecks to be archaeologically important, and who are we to disagree with them? Even with that protection, though, all of these ships are doomed. They'll eventually be broken up and swallowed down by the water. Several of them are on the verge of reaching that point already. If you visit the beach in Hastings, England, and wait for the tide to go out to its lowest level, you'll be able to catch a glimpse of a 260-year-old Dutch East India Company cargo ship called the Amsterdam. So little of it is visible above the sand that you'd be tempted to think there's almost nothing left of it, but that isn't true. The vessel is almost entirely intact. It's just that almost all of it is buried beneath the beach. The Amsterdam was on its maiden voyage when it ran aground here in 1749. Ending what had already been a disastrous voyage. 50 of its crew succumbed to an unknown illness on their way to England, and those who survived staged a mutiny against the captain. With that in mind, we have to wonder whether the ship was beached deliberately by the mutineers. Legend has it that there's still a cargo of silver bullion, fine textiles, wine, and cannon aboard the ship, but nobody's ever dug deep enough to find it. The tide comes in too quickly to make any attempt at excavation possible. Moving across the British Isles from Hastings to the Isle of Man, we find the wreckage of a steam trawler known as the Passages. The rusty hulk of the old ship has been stuck on the tiny island's Derby Beach since 1931. The Passages was on its way home from a herring fishing expedition off the coast of Northern Ireland when the captain made the questionable decision to push on through gale force winds in pitch darkness. The crew never even saw the beach until it was too late. All 13 of the crew were successfully rescued, but the steam trawler was done for. Even the cargo couldn't be safely retrieved and eventually had to be dumped overboard. Most of the hull plating of the Passages has disappeared over time, but the engine is still attached and sticks up prominently from the hull. It's become a popular spot with tourists and is said to be one of the best onshore examples of what undersea shipwrecks look like anywhere in the world. Based on its current condition, the Passages will likely still be on the beach 100 years from now. Our world tour of stunning shipwrecks takes us to Cuba next, where we'll find the shipwreck of the SS San Pascal. This fine old vessel, which saw action during the First World War, served many purposes during its long active life, but is perhaps best known for stinking of rum. It's said that the alcohol scent still lingers to this day, long after it was abandoned. That fact becomes even stranger when you consider the fact that she never once transported rum in her whole career. The San Pascal was damaged by a storm in 1921 and spent the next 3 years in dry dock until she was bought for a knockdown price by the Old Times Molasses Company of La Habana. The business used the ship to store and transport molasses for 9 years, but she encountered another storm and sank off the coast of Cayo Las Brujas in 1933. She went down with a hold full of sugarcane. She was raised back to the surface later that same year, by which point the sugarcane had fermented and become rum. She was cleaned out, fitted with cannons, and sent back out to serve in the Second World War. But the stench of rum never faded, and was remarked upon by everyone who sailed on her. The Roosevelt Inlet shipwreck was wrecked on the coast of Lewes, Delaware, USA during the American Revolution, but wasn't discovered until the 21st century. The Delaware coast is notorious among sailors because of its strong Atlantic currents and is thought to host thousands of shipwrecks, the majority of which have never been identified. The Roosevelt Inlet shipwreck used to be one of them. It was found by accident during a dredging operation close to the inlet in 2004. Archaeologists and historians spent almost 2 years studying the wreck, but all they could conclude by 2006 was that it was likely to be a European commercial vessel, and had most probably been in its current location since the 1770s. More recently, archaeologists returned to the site with new technology and were able to solve the mystery at long last. This is all that remains of a British merchant ship called the Severn, which ran aground on a sandbar in March 1772 while under the command of Captain Jonathan Hawthorne. It was bound for an anchorage in the Broadkill River when the incident happened. All of the crew survived, but much of the ship's cargo of goods from China, South Africa, Germany, and the Netherlands was lost. Staying in the United States of America, we find the Rising Sun shipwreck in Maple City, Michigan. To be more precise, we find it just off the northern tip of Pyramid Point in Lake, Michigan. The Rising Sun is an enormous steamship boiler and has been at the bottom of the lake for over 100 years after sinking in October 1917. The details surrounding the sinking are a little hazy, but the general consensus is that, despite its colossal size, it was blown off course by high winds and ran aground at Pyramid Point. Everybody on board the vessel survived the incident, but had to swim for their lives through freezing cold water to reach the shore. After the incident, the Rising Sun was forgotten as it disappeared under the sand at the bottom of the lake. But the shifting sands moved drastically in 1996 and revealed that the ship was still down there and still intact. In fact, it's in near immaculate condition. Divers who've had the opportunity to visit the wreck say that it's so well preserved that it's almost like a time capsule, offering a window into life aboard a steamship in the early 20th century. As an experiment, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson ordered the construction of 24 concrete ships in the early 20th century. Only 12 of them were ever completed, and only one of them holds the dubious honor of being the only permanent shipwreck in the Houston Ship Canal, where it's been since March 1922. That vessel is the SS Selma, an oil tanker made from concrete because the USA was experiencing steel shortages during and after the First World War. She was launched in June 1919 and briefly served in the Gulf of Mexico, but hit a jetty in Mexico in May 1920 and tore a 60-foot hole in her hull. All attempts to repair the hole failed, and so the still brand new ship was intentionally scuttled. A 1,500-foot-long channel was dug close to Pelican's Island, and the ship was dragged there and officially abandoned. Over the years, there's been talk of plans to turn it into a fishing pier, an oyster farm, or a fishing pier, but none of those plans has ever come to fruition. As it's slowly beginning to sink, it's doubtful any alternative use will be found for it now. The Norwegian fjords provided hiding places for many German vessels during the Second World War, but not all of the German ships that went there came back again. One of those vessels is the Z2 Georg Thiele. The rusting hull of this German-type 1934 class destroyer is just still about visible above the water. There's almost nothing left of it today, but when it was wrecked here during the battles of Narvik, it was only 6 years old. The Georg Thiele became a major target for the Allies after sinking several Allied ships during the early stages of the battles, but they eventually took their revenge in a devastating fashion. After taking a barrage of gunfire, The ship itself caught fire, leaving the captain with no option but to deliberately run the ship aground so his crew could escape. The damaged destroyer eventually broke in two and then capsized. In the decades that have passed since then, the wreck has become a popular spot for divers and history enthusiasts alike. Everything that was aboard the ship when it sank is still there inside the wreck, save for the bell, which is on display inside a nearby museum. Subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and enjoy watching new videos on my channel. Thanks for watching, and see you soon!